Assume I'm starting right now.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. I didn't hear any of that. So I'm Dr. Cinde Wirth. I have raised my family in central Indiana, right here in Bartholomew County, top public school here. I own a small business here. I have worked on Capitol Hill as a fellow in legislative policy. I've written and passed public policy. I have earned my PhD. I was born and raised and continue to live and lay my head down every night in this district. And I know the people of the 6th District because I am one. I am a scientist, I'm a public school teacher, and a small business owner, and the granddaughter of the lady who worked in the bakery, and the great granddaughter of one of our last horseback mail carriers in Indiana. I'm the first in my family to graduate college and the first to earn a PhD. I'm tired of our healthcare system that profits off of illnesses, and I'm ready for healthcare that benefits all of us. I'm tired of struggling to pay housing, childcare, and food, and I'm ready for everyone's American dream to be achievable again. I'm tired of our tax dollars destroying schools thousands of miles away, and I'm ready to build programs that improve our communities and schools right here in Indiana. I'm tired of wealthy corporate-minded men dragging us down. I'm tired of people using AI to talk down to us and pretend like it's their own words. I'm tired of these men making poor decisions for women and sending our sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters off to what is now an illegal and unconstitutional war. I'm ready to lift all of us in Indiana's 6th District up as the first Democratic woman to represent us. I am a daughter of Indiana's 6th District, and I've stood shoulder to shoulder with all of you, working hard since 2022 when no one else would run, and again in 2024 when no one else would run. I have been there doing the work. I'm ready to move this district forward and flip this seat. I'm not new to this race and this work. I am true to this race and this work.
Thank you, Dr. Worth. I appreciate that. So we've got a lot of material to cover. You hit on a lot of it in your intro, which is awesome. So hopefully we can get through this without any more technical gremlins flying into this mess. So the first question I've kicked off with here recently is the toll road on turning I-70 into a toll road, which I don't know how the legislature or governor thought this was a bright idea, but they came up with it. So my question is one, why now? Does it make sense? And should it even be pursued?
Okay, I think I got all of that, but I'm not 100%, kind of cut out a little bit. Um, so why now? And I think I'll get to the rest of it. But our federal highways were built with our taxpayer dollars, and taxpayer dollars I take seriously, whether it's roads, schools, whatever it is. That's our hard-earned money that should be working for us. Our Federal Highway Administration puts these waivers out in backroom deals, and I think that's wrong. And this is how states can implement toll roads. The repair costs for this shifts onto working people, and we're already struggling enough with gas, groceries, all of those costs that we're all trying to manage through right now. The I-70 proposed tollway parallels state or highway US Highway 40, and US Highway 40 goes right through Greenfield. It goes through Centerville. It goes through a big portion of Indiana's 6th District. And these small rural towns, while some of the increased traffic might benefit some of the businesses because people will avoid the toll roads, it will also cause more wear and tear on US Highway 50. And that maintenance, that funding will be another increase in expense. I will fight these toll roads and these proposals and move to end these backroom deals and waivers because I don't believe in privatizing what are public entities, and those are our interstate highway systems. This is what our congresspeople and our senators should be doing instead of selling out our constituents, and that's what I feel like they're doing. Hoosiers deserve better than billionaire-backed toll road scams, and that's what they are. Indiana has a surplus. We know this. So why are we making these deals? Um, I don't have an answer to that other than there's somebody who's profiting off of this, but the good is not going to um, it's not going to come to us, the taxpayers. It's going to go to someone else, probably who doesn't even live in Indiana. So I'm fighting for Hoosiers, and this is just one more way that Hoosiers are being penalized and forced into a worse quality of life. And it's a simple toll road. And I know when I stop at the truck stop in Richmond, right on I-70, um, I've heard people talking about, the terrible quality of our roads. Well, they've been working on I-70 since 2020 when I first started running. Um, and some of it that's already been done needs done again. There's giant potholes on them.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with you. The impact on US 40, I am not in any way, shape, or form looking forward to because Greenfield already has challenges as it is. We don't need to invite any more, that's for sure.
Right.
Um, so we've already had a question kind of pop in. Um, question is one of the biggest challenges veterans face is the little to zero help for separating veterans, integrating back into civilian society. I can personally relate to this one because being a veteran, um, trying to translate what you do militarily into the civilian world doesn't necessarily always match. So, and then the other problem is that the training, you don't really get training coming out of the service to come back into civilian life. And then you add in folks like myself that have PTSD and anxiety and depression and all these things. It kind of creates a lot of problems and gets us into this homeless issue that we see so much with our veterans. So, what is your plan to address some of that and see how we can get more from the country that they serve?
So I'll start with the healthcare aspect of that because under a Medicare for All plan, that would encompass our VA system as well. Um, last week, I think on last Wednesday, my dad went to the VA for a dermatology appointment and they were going to take a little skin cancer spot off of his face. What happened was the dermatologist found that it went deeper and it was sort of it went very deep and it was very serious, a lot more so than it appeared when he first went in for the appointment. So in the course of the surgery, the surgeon contacted, to see, however they process that stuff, to see if he could get the plastic surgeon in there to help because they took a significant portion of my dad's nose. That was turned down. So that surgeon on his own spent time that, he wasn't compensated for taking care of my dad, making sure that his face was structured appropriately after removing a portion of his nose and part of his cheek, so that he was not as disfigured as badly as he could have been. And what I'm finding out as I'm digging into this week is this is from budget cuts. So when I see, and my dad's will be 80 this year, so he's a Vietnam veteran. When I see veterans coming home now, and over the past 25 years, we're still not at that quality of care always that we need to be, and we need to be a higher quality of care. We need to be addressing the PTSD in a way that veterans want to come in for the care. And I think that's also a part of that. When you talk about, training for reentering society, that should absolutely be a part of, we have the GI Bill, but we can expand that to include those other educational pathways because it's critical. And we know that when we support veterans um, in their reentry into society and address PTSD and make sure their health care is taken care of, that they are valued members of our community, that shift going from combat to civilian life is something, if you haven't been through it, you don't understand that. And so I think that those groups that a lot of veterans will form, those relationships, those are important to maintain, and there needs to be support for that. And that is what our government is for. And I believe that wholeheartedly, that it is what it is for. The government is there to help us take care of each other. Um, so And I think I heard the whole question. If I missed a part of that, you may have to re-ask it because you were cutting in and out a little bit.
Crap. Sorry, might help I mute myself. The best part, or the last part, I think, was just the homelessness issue that is out there for our veterans, and how could we help them maybe find housing, uh, that would work for local economies, and well, I mean, for all, it's a good thing all the way around. But how do we get there? How do we make it happen?
Again, we need those programmings through either the VA or another organization where we can, have people set up to succeed and not to fail. Um, we're short in our country over 50 million housing units that are for affordable housing units. It's significant. And I think, we have a lot of people returning from our active duty and, our veterans who have skills that I think we can use. And I think, you know, providing those wraparound services is critical. And I don't think it should be disaggregated to, separate systems. I think it should be more of a holistic, encompassing one because and I know this from talking to, um, I went to a VFW post 2 years ago and spent some time talking to, um, people, mostly men. There was one woman there, but mostly men there who were telling me about, reentry into society and what it was like and the toll it took on them and how many jobs they had been through. So I think, this is a real issue. The homelessness is a real issue. And we just haven't decided as a country that we value this and we want to take care of the problem. And I think that's where we start is valuing people and wanting to take care of it. But again, we're short 50 million affordable housing units in the country, and um, you know, I'm, veterans are a significant portion of that. So it is critical.
Absolutely. And and this is something in the space I work in with local government, of trying to advocate for using city properties for like tiny homes, and
Right.
trying to just provide that avenue to say, hey, here's how you can, yeah, you've taken a hit. We get that. Here's your step up. You can get into it, and that's what most of us as vets, we just want to find our place to belong. We want to serve.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, again, I could talk about veterans issues all day long, but
No,
we have
and I
other
mean,
things we're going to tackle on too soon.
we have properties that are not being used. We have properties that are, being devalued. We have somehow we're finding land that the government is approving for data centers, but we're not finding land that is being approved for humans. And I think that right there says everything that we need to change about things is, you know, tiny homes are great and there are people who want to live in them. But I've also talked to people who say there's no way I would ever live in a tiny home. I'd rather live outside in a tent. Um, and I think, I think we need solutions for that work for all people. We may need tiny homes. We may need temporary homes. We may need homes where people can live and feel connected to other people. Closer knit. We may need places where people can be out in nature a little bit more and have a little bit more space to roam. And I don't think that those choices should depend on your economic status.
That's fair. That is very fair. Well, you just hit a very good segue for us to my next question as far as economic status. So the governor, being the infinitely wise individual that he is, has taken kind of a victory lap on utility costs, quote unquote, and being more, I don't want to use the word transparent, but changing things, let's just put it that way. Um, what do you see in this space of um, dealing with for-profit utilities that are raising rates faster than inflation and just really just kind of squeezing on the affordability issue?
Again, and I think I said earlier that our we have our utilities are pub should be public entities, and that's how they started, or how they've been most effective is when we have public tax dollars and public entities, and then people paying our use rates because they are it's for our utilities are for the public good. Um, and I wholeheartedly believe that when our services that are for the public good are privatized and turned into private entities, uh, the only people who win are the people who are invested in that. And I think, when we have for-profit and shareholder model of our formerly public utilities, I think residents and our everyday users lose. And I'm disappointed in the way that the privatization of our public utilities is conducted and continues to be pushed on us. I do think it is a sellout, and I don't think it benefits taxpayers or residents at all. At the federal level, I think we can push for legislation that offers incentives for municipalities and small towns, even larger population centers, to reclaim ownership of some of these utilities that have gone into private hands. If we do this, yes, it is a solution that is a big reach, but it is doable. But it would mean lower utility bills for us. At the very least, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, the IURC, needs to be elected and not appointed, because the people that are currently on the IURC are not working in our interest. They're working in the interest of shareholder profits still. And if we remove those shareholder profits, I think that will go a long way for consumer protection. In the same vein as that, we need to strengthen our consumer protection laws, especially with utilities. And I think that's another way that we can do that if we don't take that full reach to, you know, put privately owned utilities back into public domain. I don't think anybody is really happy with our utility rates right now. And I don't think billionaires have to ever ask themselves the question, am I going to pay the electric bill or am I going to eat this month? So I think that's the reality that most of us live with, but that people making these decisions are not living with. I had students that would come into school and say, hey, we had our utilities shut off. We'd have electricity. Our refrigerator, all of our food's going to spoil. I don't know what to do. And so, as a teacher, I'm asking, well, when was it shut off? How long has it been in there? What all do you have? And we would set up a cooler brigade, and then we would have teachers who would offer their freezer space, their refrigerator space. This isn't how anybody should be living in today's world. So,
Absolutely. No, that's a very, very great point. And I will say, I love the point where you hit on that utilities should be in local control and local hands because then it is governed by the folks that are receiving those services. And, it's a more direct um, customer service model. I know I'm a little spoiled because I work in municipal utilities and everything I take in as rates, I put back into our system, and I'm very
right,
proud of that. But I will also say, on the federal level, access to funds is becoming a difficult proposition. State
right.
revolving funds are not receiving as much, or they're being chopped into with earmarks. Oh, sorry, I'm going to get on a soapbox. Let me stop. But anyway, long story short, there definitely some work in that space for sure to happen.
And I think that's the thing is that when we've introduced profit into things, it complicates everything. And right now at the federal level, we're seeing a whole sellout of our entire federal system, to the highest bidder. I was in DC when NASA had a rocket launch and SpaceX had a rocket launch. And I can tell you there was a distinct difference between the two. And this was just, space stuff. And the difference was that NASA was concerned with safety, um, the mission, the science, the other peripheral scientific things that students had done that were part of that. The SpaceX one, by contrast, was worried about public image. They were worried about profits. They were worried about different things, and it was just distinct, the difference in the two. And I think that to me was a big eye-opening moment of what those differences really make when you drill it down to the everyday level, because the same thing applies when you have a shareholder model. That everyday person at the end is not the concern, but that's my concern. Who's at the end of
Oh,
that
I hear
electrical
you.
line. Yeah, or the water line in your
Oh
case.
yeah, and fair point, fair point. As a giant sci-fi and space geek, I am totally. We'll swing back to that topic here in just a little bit. More to touch on that one. Okay, big thing that is a huge part of what we're doing right now, voting. Indiana has a repressed, suppressed, depending on how you want to look at it. We usually don't lead the nation in voter turnout. We have an issue with this thing. How can we turn that bus around from a federal level and do better in our voting efforts and get people engaged in the process? How do we do
I mean, we do have one of the lowest turnouts in the nation. And instead of trying to increase that, our current federal leadership is trying to suppress that further, as are our state leaders. But I think we saw people realize that they want their voices to matter. And one thing I think federally we can do is make election days a federal holiday. It's so simple. And I think it would do a lot to be able to let people, have the breathing space from their jobs to be able to go and vote. At the same time, people do need their incomes, but by design, people are struggling. And when people are struggling and having to work 2 and 3 jobs, that makes it less likely that people will go out to vote. And I think that's just another incidence of how this voter suppression runs so deeply through our country. Um, I think, though, when we're at the state of desperation that we're in now, we're going to see increased numbers. And I think with early voting in Indiana, I think we are starting to see increased numbers in a primary because people are in such dire straits. We're said to be a red state in Indiana, but we really, since we have the only way that we can decide who's a Republican and who's a Democrat is by how they vote in a primary. And given that a lot of our primaries are uncontested in the Democrat Party, or there is no one to run until someone's slated in after the primary, that makes it seem like there are way more Republicans than there really are. And the best demographic breakout I've seen in Indiana shows that independent voters are almost 50% of registered voters. It's like 48 and a half, 49%. So I think I think with that, we show up, we get to know our neighbors. We let our neighbors know that we are present and we exist. Um, I think a lot of people really feel isolated because I know when I've been canvassing and knocking on doors, I'll show up and somebody will say, "Oh, I'm the only Democrat in my neighborhood." And we always kind of chuckle because it's every neighborhood we go to. It's a lot of houses that we knock on those doors. And we always say, well, look around. We've just knocked on these, 9 other doors in your neighborhood, and there are 9 signs out. So you've got 9 neighbors who feel the same way that you do, or whatever the number is. And I think that's the reality in a lot of our communities in Indiana, and especially when you get out into the suburban areas. Um, so, last week we had volunteers phone banking and encouraging people who were reluctant to vote to go vote. And one of the calls that I made, I talked to a gentleman who was in his 80s, and he says, well, I don't know, does my vote matter anymore? I've been voting Democrat for so long. And he said, but the lady down the hall, she really wants me to take her to go vote. So I think I'm going to take her to go vote. But what do the young people think? And I think young people are really feeling like they're in that desperate situation. They can't afford anything. They'll feel like they'll never buy a house. When their cars break down, a lot of times they can't afford to fix it for several months. And I think when we show that there are people out there to vote for who want to help make their lives better, I think that helps. I mean, look at No Kings and how many people were at the 5 events that I went to. I mean, it was incredible.
Absolutely.
People are paying attention, so I think this year's really good. I don't know if you can hear that thunder, but my whole house is shaking. Um, so so if
Jeez.
I lose
Well,
power,
if and I
sorry.
just got a comment. No, I
Yeah.
can track it. Well, we're having just a comment saying that Greenfield's having some flickers. So if everything
Okay.
drops out, folks, that is not my intention. Just
Yep.
putting it out there. So let's
Exactly.
go ahead and tie in. Let's tie in the economic part of that. What you were, I mean, you hit it perfectly. Many agree a $25 an hour minimum wage is a good target. Although there's the argument that small and medium businesses would get crushed, quote unquote, usually win that argument, which I think I think that's kind of a red herring in a certain respect that they. Yeah, sorry, there you go. I'm just answering. Sorry. What is your stance on raising the minimum wage now, and how do we keep pace with it in 2 to 5 years?
So, I mean, I think I, I'm a small business person. I've been talking to, actually, after one of our voter forums, I was talking to a farmer who had watched it. And he was just really, really upset with, the fact that a $25 an hour minimum wage would be forced on him. He wouldn't be able to, to pay for help in his fields and, things like that. Small businesses are the lifeblood of the United States. And what's happened is our big businesses um, are are really so unregulated now. And I mean, I'm not a proponent of overregulation, but when we have people working at Walmart who can't afford to have one job because of the way that these large companies are sort of gaming our system, by limiting the number of hours so that there's no healthcare benefits or, no overtime, but arranging schedules so that people literally don't have enough time to sleep, and that's all legal. Um, that's part of where the problem lies. And so when we look at these minimum wage things, we really need to look at living wages. Where are we? What are the living wages? What is that? Because if we push through a federal minimum wage of $25 an hour across the country, even if it's staged in, that's not maybe enough money to live in San Francisco, and it may bankrupt every small business, in Southern Illinois or Indiana. So I really think we need to listen to the economists on this issue. This is their expertise. This is what they've studied. This is what they know. And the economists are saying, yes, we need to raise it. I agree, we need to raise it. It needs to be a livable wage. And I think, especially right now with inflation, that $25 an hour minimum wage, if we commit to that, what if that turns out to be $2 an hour in today's wages by 2030? We don't know that. So I think we need to not necessarily tread carefully, but I think we need to look at it smartly. We need to look at it intelligently, and we need to move toward the solution that will help the most people. And that starts with healthcare, because that is the biggest chunk of money that we all spend. And so when we move to single payer universal healthcare, then that will take that piece of it off the table. And then when we reassess, okay, where are we? What does a livable wage look like now? I think we need to think it through that way. There, you can say anything you want and put all kinds of solutions out there, but it is more complex than just saying $25 an hour will solve this problem. I think that's an irresponsible way to push this through.
And that's fair. I mean, there's a lot of change across different markets for sure. And that actually leads into a question we had come in. And I actually appreciate this because this ties into another question I was going to ask. What is your plan to address costs for farmers, specifically small family farms? The input costs are rising every year, but uh, it's not only the war and tariffs raising costs for us, it's commodity price increases. Vendors increase their costs, and that hits small farmers hard, and they don't have the negotiation power or the leverage as larger farms when selling, nor do they see the same discounts for wholesale buying. Do you have a plan or ideas to help that small farmer gain a level advantage in the playing field?
I do. So in our farm bill, it's essentially written to benefit large corporate farms. And large corporate farms are completely different than small family farms. Defining a small family farm is also a complex issue. We have small family farms that are just, tens of acres. We have small family farms that are, 2, 3, 400 acres. We have so defining that can be very problematic when you're looking at it legislatively. So I think working with legacy farms, historic farms, small farms where people may have to take a second job to be able to pay the bills to keep farming. That's the reality for most small family farms. So when we write this farm bill and rewrite it, which I don't think it's passed yet again, but I was in the House of Representatives as a fellow in 2018 when the last farm bill was passed. So I did get to look at it in depth. The office that I was in was really taking a magnifying glass to every section of it. In particular, they were really interested in a kombucha and the section that talked about growing hemp. So I've looked into a lot of this, and I think protecting our small family farms, our legacy farms, our second, third, fourth, up to 8, 10, 12 generation farmers. I think that should be important. I think addressing, those pathways in which, the land can be passed down is important, and protecting that land to be passed down. Um, Again, healthcare is a huge portion of this, because what I'm hearing when I am in the counties is that young people who want to take over a family farm often can't and have to go, several hours drive away to get a job for healthcare, for, other to cover other costs, and can't be directly involved in the farming, not every time, but often enough that it's come up many times that universal single payer healthcare would also help this situation out. But more importantly, addressing these things that are needed in the farm bill, instead of just bailing out these big corporate farms that are a shareholder model, and I mean a corporate structured shareholder model outside of a family, because there are several family farms that are now structured, in a corporate way to be able to take advantage of things,
Mhm.
but they still don't get all of the deals and the perks that these extremely large farms get. And I think, bring people to the table, let them tell us what they need so that we can keep this part of our culture alive and keep people being able to do the work that they want to do and that their family's done for generations.
Absolutely. And in fact, that was kind of my wife and I were kind of talking about this earlier this morning, not small farms particularly, but small businesses, where I think this model that we see exhibited, especially on a local level, uh, where we see big corporations, data centers or, take your pick of whatever big critter it is, gets tax breaks or abatements or all these concessions, but yet small business owners don't get those thought processes. And
Yeah,
I would kind of advocate that we need to inverse that model. Would that be
we,
plausible?
absolutely. And I think so, yes. Again, it's the same kind of thing. When you look at what the definition of a small business is from the federal government's perspective, it's ludicrous. That's a big business. Um, and so the same things are happening that happened in the Farm Bill are happening in small business. Because the true small businesses, the mom and pops, people with 12 or less employees, which are the bulk of our small businesses in the United States, they get left in the dust, and there are very few tools for them. That started to change under the Biden administration, and the Small Business Administration, the SBA, was really focused on building those businesses and putting money, into those businesses and giving, incentives and loans and other tools for those businesses to use so that they could grow. And I think some of those have already been rolled back. And, I'm a small business owner. I have been since 1992. And, you know, it we're not a big business. We've never been a big business. One of the things that going back to the minimum wage, was said to me at the outset of us starting our business was, someone whose family's been in business over 100 years, who said to my husband and I when we were starting ours and asking for advice, that if you can't afford to pay somebody a living wage, you don't have a small business. And I do believe in that. If you can't pay somebody a living wage, you don't have a small business. And that's something that, we live by, that, you know, but at the same time, how do you grow? Well, you need tools. How do you get those tools? Well, that's where those incentives come in. That's where, again, our government is there to help people build businesses, build lives, um, and not just profit off of us.
Right. Absolutely. So I want to tie two questions together, just for, and I may butcher this a little bit, so just bear with me a little. Um, so one of the things that we definitely feel here in the sixth district with our current occupant of the office you're seeking to get to is not have poor representation, right? We don't get to hear directly from him. He likes to reside in a certain safe space uh, type of model type of deal. Um, so how does, sorry, let me rephrase this. How does a sixth district representative need to be engaging with their district, and how do you implement that plan? And if you can maybe keep it to a 3 minute, so we can get to a couple others, we'll kind of go from there.
Um, Representation, showing up. I did hear that this morning Jefferson Shreve did show up to Franklin, Indiana, to the Otterbein Center for some kind of a town hall on scams, which I think is great. I think it may be the first one he's done that was outside of a large donor base, but still you had to be screened, you had to be approved, you had to get some kind of ticket, you had to, whatever. I think being a real person, being available to people is how representation works, because that's the only way you can really effectively listen to people. That's what I do every single day right now. That's what I will continue doing. It's what I did as a teacher. It's what I did as a community volunteer for 20 the last 32 years. I can't remember how old I am now. Um, and I think
We won't
it's
tell anybody.
just Yeah, it's just literally that. It is showing up, it is listening, being aware of the problems that are going on and things that you may not be aware that are going on. And recognizing that you may not know everything that's going on, but there is somebody who does, and they can tell you, they can let you know. And quite often, when we look for solutions, we leave the very people out who need to be part of that solution, who are experiencing that, who have been through that, who know what would have helped better. That's what I'm committed to.
Yep. And man, you just opened up a door that I want to go through, but I want to get to one other question first. I love it though. Um, so in that, and as part of that representation block, we know right now we have our, and we mentioned it at the top of the hour of the sea legal war action, whatever the devil you want to call it in Iran. I call it a cluster, but I won't complete the last part of that. But anyway, so um, how does Congress take back its authority and rein in this mess? I mean, what does that look like? You know, from your perspective, you get to Congress. What's your plan of attack?
So, right now, there are very few people demanding accountability to upholding the Constitution. But every single elected official in Washington has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect it and defend it against foreign and domestic enemies. And right now, there are foreign and domestic enemies, and I'll just say it this way. It sounds a little flippant, but running amok in Washington, and they really are. We have unqualified people running whole sections of our government. We have gutted our diplomatic corps. We have gutted our people who understand the financial systems of our government. We have gutted our entire professional corps in the government, and these are nonpartisan people. So step one is putting that back, or maybe step two. Step one is committing and getting other people to join you in committing to uphold the Constitution, put the checks and balances back, hold hold our government, especially our executive branch, to that, in articles of impeachment for anyone who has violated laws and not upheld the Constitution. And I feel very strongly about that. I was in Washington, D.C. again during Trump's first administration when articles of impeachment were introduced in the House a couple of times. And I think I don't know that people are afraid to do that. I'm not sure why they're not doing that, but it just seems to me it is the way our system was designed, and we need to make sure that that system is up and functioning. What happened with the chainsaws and the budget and unelected people coming in to disband whole departments is illegal. And I think people who were a part of that should be held accountable. And I am ready to do that. And I will always uphold the Constitution and cast my votes in support of the laws and precedents that are set forth in our Constitution.
Absolutely. So as a part of this Iran war conflict debacle mess, I'm a Navy guy. Spent more time in the Persian Gulf than I want to even think about. Um, so there's a lot that's happening there. The first component of this mess was Israel's portion of this, and we continue to fund Israel to the extent that it is still carrying on genocide activities in Palestine and these things. Should we still be continuing that funding, or should we? What 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 is that? What is that box we put into there?
What we're doing in Iran is illegal. It is not according to our Constitution. It was not. It was not voted on by Congress. And Congress alone has that power to declare war. And when Congress capitulated they're all in direct opposition and defiance of our Constitution. And I believe strongly in that. As far as Israel, I mean, Israel has been an ally, but I think the administration that is there now is not. The aid that we are giving is contributing to continuing the genocide, and I think that should be discontinued until those agreements of ending the genocide. It just we need to stop all of that aid. Ukraine does need our aid against the incursion by Russia, and I feel strongly about that because they are an ally. They are not committing a genocide, and I think that's where we need to stand. We need all of our allies, and the United Nations has declared what's happened in Gaza a genocide, and the fact that our government and our country and most of our elected officials refuse to admit that is troubling on a scale of human rights and human dignity that we need to uphold. Human rights and human
Yeah,
dignity
absolutely.
should come first.
Well, definitely because America's done a really stellar job on human rights here of late, unfortunately, and that is definitely something we need to vastly improve upon. So. And there's other areas I could get into in that topic, but time's starting to run against me, so I'm going to move forward a little bit. I want to talk about bringing federal, state, local together kind of into the space of the sixth district in the span of data centers. And this kind of ties back to our utility conversation a little bit earlier. Um, so data centers are unique topics, I guess I'll say is maybe the most diplomatic way I can say it. Um, they have a lot. I mean, they're power hungry consumers. They, have water components still, and especially that hits in my space pretty hard. Um, so my question as our federal representative, how do we start putting better? I mean, our state's kind of started to very minorly put some ideas in that in Marion County specifically, but the Indiana overall is not because we don't like to do anything more than the federal level does for whatever reason. Um, so how do we handle this kind of new space in the technology boom and the balance between resource, user rates, and making it make sense?
I mean, I know in Indiana, we have had a lot of opposition to renewable energy the flames of that have been fanned by current Republican incumbents in our state legislature. So at the state level, that's been happening for a number of years. In fact, one of our state senators, Eric Cook, who was one of the leaders in our renewable energy and environmental issues, that packet of work that they do, is also one of the major shareholders of Duke Energy. So I think we don't have ethics laws in Indiana at the state level. We need those. That's number one, because a lot of what's happening is hinging on these backroom deals, these payoffs, people profiting off of things that they should be prohibited from having any investment in. So I feel very strongly about that. The data centers, I have been opposed to data centers since I read how they were being arranged, the environmental impacts of them. We saw the test cases. We saw the problems that are happening in other states where these large data centers have gone in. What they promise is not what they deliver. The massive amounts of energy that they need are not serving us and our constituencies and our people, our local people. And I think Indiana is very attractive for those because of our low cost of living, our low cost of land, when you compare it to other places in the nation. They overpromise jobs. They have worked to use unions as pawns to try to push this through, while at the same time holding up right to work, which to me makes no sense. Um, there's never any talk in any of these data center proposals that I've seen that looks at green renewable energy all the way through and solutions that are long-term, environmentally minded and viable. And we have the technology available to be able to do that, but it's expensive. And so right now what we're seeing is that these data centers are placing profits and exploitation over people and quality of life. Um, we we will see massive problems come through down the pike, but the people who are profiting off of this won't be here. They won't be living here. They
Yeah,
won't be
absolutely.
they won't be here. So again, I think a lot of this goes back to putting people over profits, making sure that we have strong ethics laws in place at all levels of government, not just the federal, not just the state, but also the local. And I think that's the reality of what we're seeing right now is the lack of ethics and the lack of any kind of system to hold people accountable to these ethics who are elected right now.
Correct. Absolutely. And believe me, I could write a book on that particular topic of ethics things in government.
Yeah.
I think we all probably could. So I got two questions I'm going to try to wrap into the last few minutes we have. So this question relates to specifically the environment, tangentially to data centers. But the current administration is doing its best to lower the water quality, pollution elimination standards, even clean water standard, even drinking water standards, clean air standards, you name it. I mean, basically, they're trying to shred the EPA lock, stock, and barrel. What do you plan to do to help turn this around and enhance our water quality specifically in maybe 2 minutes?
So as a teacher, this is how I ended up in Washington, D.C. as a fellow. Exactly this issue. So the EPA was being gutted in 2017, the first time. And when that was happening, I happened to be like the same week that was happening, I was teaching a project-based learning unit on how we ended up with environmental laws, why we have environmental laws, where the Clean Water Act came from, where the Clean Air Act came from, what happened in the Cuyahoga River to help kind of, and I hate to use the word spark because it caught on fire, to spark some of this and really draw attention to what was happening. Most of our navigable rivers in the United States were so polluted they were all unswimmable, unusable, unfishable. We are headed back there. So I think putting the teeth back in these regulations that we have known since the 1970s are good for everyone, but maybe a little more expensive for businesses. Um, we've got to put the teeth back in those regulations. We have new technologies, we have new information, we have science has advanced since the 1970s, so we know even more how detrimental the loss of these laws are. I'm also a trained climate reality corps member, one of Al Gore's people that go out and teach about what's happening in the environment. Um, it's just so disheartening to see that businesses are being deregulated to allow poisoning our water. And all I can think of is the Lorax. And I taught the Lorax to high school kids. And if you haven't read the Lorax, get it. It's one of the best books ever. Um, so I speak for the trees and the water and the air and the land.
And I feel such a kinship with that because I've been screaming at the top of my lungs for a long time about how we could move things better if we would just invest in the science and invest in the technologies. Anyway, again, I could get on a soapbox, but you did hit on one topic that ties into our last question that we had come in about education and teaching. Indiana's voucher program uses taxpayer money to fund private schools, and a lot of public schools, especially rural schools, are struggling. What is your plan to support public schools, and do you support a voucher system that pulls funding away from them?
I do not. My PhD is in cultural and educational policy, which is all about this. So when the voucher system, the very first voucher system that came to be was after Brown versus the Board of Education to uphold segregation in schools. And it was a way that segregation could be realized and skirt the federal regulations. Fast forward from the 1950s to 15, 20 years ago, and the voucher system was revived. Indiana actually became a testing ground for the voucher system under our former governor Mike Pence. I was in the National Council of State Legislatures in several meetings in 2018 and 2019, where the discussions were about educational voucher systems and Indiana being the testing ground for this. And the question was, wait, there's somebody here from Indiana. Who are you? And I would raise my hand. And that was when I became aware that we were one of the first states to put this into effect on a statewide scale to see, how far they could go, how far they could push it. We are seeing our public schools defunded to the point where in Rush County we're losing. I hope I don't lose power. There's a big bolt of lightning just now. Rush County, we're losing one of our elementary schools, and I think that brings them down to two, because so much money has been taken out of our public school systems. This doesn't serve anyone except for the schools who are receiving this money that ordinarily wouldn't. And when we take this money away from our public schools, we're taking money away from all of our students. Public schools serve every student. Private schools do not have to serve every student. Public schools do. It is a requirement. So if you have a student with disabilities, they have a federal right to an education. And so this is what our Department of Education oversees. We need to strengthen our Department of Education, put back some of the programs that are being cut, put back the monies that are being cut, overturn Montana versus Espinoza versus Montana, which was the decision that that allowed for public tax dollars to be given to private religious schools. How we do this? I've read and heard several different ways that we could progress on this. I think that the how doesn't matter. It's that it's done matters, because until our public tax dollars go back 100% to our public schools, we will be in this educational financial deficit, and it will affect all of our students, which will affect all of our communities, which will affect all of us. And people forget that the ultimate toll is our communities and our young people. And our young people will be a part of our communities because that time goes very quickly. So we need to make sure that we have every public school fully funded so that we can serve every student to the best of our ability.
Absolutely. So to close out our session, I like to ask one fun thing to kind of wrap up all this heavy that we've been talking about. And I wanted to swing back to the space things, but this is going to kind of be quasi in there. If you could select one superhero, sci-fi person, one character that fits you, who would that be?
Sci-fi person? If I,
Or general character that
I mean, so sci-fi, I would be the guy that in Gattaca that lies about everything and games the system, because I think that's just wrong. So that would be sci-fi. That's like totally different though. But like a fictional character, I kind of see myself as a combination of Elastigirl and Miss Frizzle, because Elastigirl is flexible, literally and figuratively, because it's what women do every day and what we're expected to do. And despite everything that Elastigirl does, she's constantly underestimated, and I get that. But she always kind of comes through and kicks some, kicks some ass, and I like that.
well,
Um, The Miss Frizzle thing, though, I mean, like that's just me. I mean, like I can do a really rousing seatbelts, everyone, and get everybody going. And I think as a science teacher, that was what I loved the most was watching this love of science and how things work and the joy on students' faces from that. So I guess I would have to be my own little character of those because science is about failing
Hey, it can work.
failing and retooling and coming back stronger and figuring it out. And that's what I'm all about.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Wirth, thank you so much for your time this evening. I appreciate the conversation. And again, this will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Be on the lookout for more speaker sessions in the times to come with all of our other candidates, with township boards, our sheriff's candidates, all of that. And if you haven't yet, go out and vote. Make your voice heard, Indiana. And at that point, I thank everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.